So I am thrilled to be here with you guys. As Amit said, I am Sarah Scott. I am the Director of Education Abroad for the Broad College of Business at MSU. I've been in that role for about 2.5 years. And before that, actually, I was the Assistant Director of the MSU CIBER for about 12 years, where the one of the biggest pieces of my portfolio, if you will, was these international business institutes for community colleges. And so when Erkan and Amit asked me if I would join you all today, I jumped at the chance, and I'm thrilled to be here, and thought that we would talk a little bit about education abroad. As Amit said, study abroad, education abroad, it's a little bit interchangeable. MSU uses the term education abroad out of a sense that that's a little bit bigger tent, a little more inclusive of not only study options, but work options. So internships abroad, service learning, things of that nature. And I think that, certainly just to give you a quick 40,000 foot view of the landscape, certainly these are tough times for study abroad or education abroad. No one is traveling at the moment. And I think universities, from the very largest universities with some of the biggest programs in the country, to the smallest schools who work in consortium models to send students abroad on multi-college, multi-institution programs, are all really evaluating what's going to be necessary for students to go abroad safely again. What are the health and safety measures that need to be in place? What are some of the immigration or just, borders being open and having confidence that they're going to remain open? Those are the kinds of issues that, at this 40,000 foot level, we're really looking at. But I think that, in the context of community colleges, a couple of the challenges with education abroad that I have heard and seen so frequently over the years are, of course, that, so many of your students are non-traditional students, and going abroad for an extended period of time is really not a viable option. You've got students who have family responsibilities, who have work responsibilities, and even, taking, say, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, which at a 4-year institution is considered a short-term program, that's going to take the cards off the table for so many of the students at community colleges. And then, of course, somewhat related is the financial matter that, your students, even significant numbers of your students struggle with, food insecurity on a national level. And so, when you look at issues like that, and then you zero out to study abroad, that really begins to look like a luxury item, to take a trip overseas that's going to cost several $1,000s is really a challenge. And so I think that, a few things I want to talk about with study abroad for community colleges in particular. And the first is to really try and leverage partnerships, collaborations, consortium models, not to feel like, well, gosh, if we offer programs, we're only going to have 2 students for whom this is viable, especially initially. And so should we even do this? I think really trying to work with other colleges, and whether that's, something like, George used to manage with the Southwest Virginia Center, or if you're familiar with CCID, Community Colleges for International Development, which is one of the community college focused organizations that help schools to connect with one another and form consortia, so that if you've got two students and you've got two students and you've got two students, and individually none of your institutions has enough students to make a viable program, by leveraging your resources and bringing your students together, you're able to do that. So, you know, my first sort of advice or recommendation as you think about education abroad is to think outside the box, think beyond the traditional models that you hear about, you know, in the Open Doors report, that you hear about in, you know, the media and the popular press, and really think about how you can make education abroad work for your students. And I think that similarly, it's important to think about time frames and locations that can work for your students. You know, the traditional education model was, you know, a language major goes abroad and they're overseas for a full semester and they're getting this very immersive experience. And that's fantastic. I mean, I think that in a perfect world, if we could send every human on the planet into another culture for 6 months or 12 months, think about, you know, how much more of a globally connected and understanding society we would be. But that's not realistic, right? We're working in the boundaries of the real world and what we can actually accomplish. And so I think that it's always better to get students out of their comfort zone, even if it's for a week, than to go, okay, we can't do a full semester, we can't do a full year, so that's not education abroad, so we're not going to do that. You know, really think about how you could utilize, for example, the spring break period, just to get students overseas one time, you know, for 1 week. I've run programs at Michigan State for close to 10 years now, most commonly in Asia. And, you know, several years ago, one of the students who traveled with me was a young woman from a very, very small, very rural community in Michigan. And she was wrapping up her senior year and accepted a job. She was a supply chain major. Supply chain is MSU's the top supply chain school in the country. She got a very good job. And she came back to me probably about a year after she had been in Japan with me, and said that she wanted me to know that going for that 1 week was the most impactful thing she had done as an undergraduate, because there was a day on the program. I give my students one free day, and I provide them with all kinds of ideas and suggestions for what they might see and do in Tokyo. And then they're free to explore if there are things that might not be included on my list. And so she had this list, and there were all these things that she wanted to do. And Tokyo has a fantastic subway system. In the city of Tokyo, which is the population of metropolitan Tokyo is about 35 million people. So it's the population of the state of California in the city. And in the entire city, you're never more than a 7-minute walk from the nearest subway station. And so, you know, that's how the students get around. And she said to me that she was terrified. This was the most terrifying thing that she had ever had to do. And she and the girl who was sort of her buddy, and, you know, they'd mapped out what they wanted to do, and they had to take the subway in Tokyo by themselves. And not everything was in English, and they went the wrong way, and they got off in the wrong stop, and they were a little bit lost. And she said, at one point I might have cried a little bit. She said, and then I didn't really think about it until after I started my job. And she said, you know, in my job, there have been a couple times where my boss has given me really hard things that I wasn't sure that I could do. But I reminded myself that if I could take the subway in Tokyo by myself, me, this little farm girl, if I could do that all by myself, I could do anything that my boss was asking me to do. And those are the kinds of transformative experiences that you want to give students. It's not just about, you know, get them overseas and see the world, and the idea of global mindset, which as educators we know is important, and we get this big picture idea of global connectedness and global mindset, but it's really about providing students with experiences that we can't give them in the classroom that help them later in their life, personally and professionally. And so I've got just a quick, can I share my screen, Erkan? It looks like I can. So, I've got just a couple of slides, and I'll make sure that Erkan gets these as well, that look at the benefits from an employer perspective, because of course in community colleges, workforce development is so much more even a part of what you're doing than those of us in the four-year institutions. And so when you think about education abroad and you're talking to students about it, you're talking to community members, or you're talking to parents or to people who are saying, why would we offer this? Why do we need this? What's the benefit to our students, to our community? These are expensive programs. Why do we want to be invested here? You want to be able to speak from the standpoint of, what do employers value? Why can this be an important experience for students to have from the standpoint of future employability? And of course, interacting with people who hold different interests and values and perspectives, beginning to understand cultural difference in the workplace, having the opportunity to meet with businesses and with executives overseas, and seeing, what does collectivism look like in other societies? When you go into a business and every person that you encounter, from the CEO to the janitor, is wearing the same uniform, that sends a message that's very different from any workplace that you're going to visit in the United States. Adapting to situations of change, that the example of riding the subway by yourself, or, one of you talked earlier about, trying sushi or using chopsticks, or, really just experiencing things that you're not going to experience in West Virginia or in Virginia, or in most of the places that your students are likely to live most of their lives. And then, this idea of undertaking tasks that are unfamiliar to you, that feel risky, that, you have to problem solve in a more real way, to identify new problems, to think about solutions, that out of the box thinking. Those are real skills that students hone by going abroad, and that when you're talking to stakeholders, that you want to really emphasize that it's not just about going to Paris and seeing the Eiffel Tower and going, oh yeah, I've been there, I've seen that. But that I think also with students, it's important to set the bar appropriately and to level set that simply going abroad does not guarantee that you gain these skills or these competencies, and that you really need to reflect on the experience. You need to be able to articulate what it is that you have gained, how you can apply those. And so that's also one of the things that I would say to all of you, as you think about education abroad, you want to think about not just what does it take to get the students on an airplane and send them to, Mexico City for a week, or even to Quebec for a week, or Montreal, but, how do you make sure that they are reflecting on those experiences that they've had, and that they really have the opportunity to showcase that in whether it's in interviews or in other settings. So I'm going to stop sharing again. And like I said, I will make sure that Erkan gets those and that those get to you in the Dropbox. But I think that, those really are the benefits there. And then I want to talk about a couple of ideas for sort of some virtual learning, because certainly the environment that we're all in right now, you know, if you leave here today and you're all energized and you want to go back and you want to tell your dean on Monday morning, yeah, we're going to do this, your dean's going to be like, so really, what's your plan? All the borders are closed, you know, we're not sending students anywhere. What's your plan for next year? Because probably, as much as I would love for your plan for next year to be to operationalize this, that's not realistic, and we live in the real world. So I would really encourage you to think about some virtual options for next year. Those could be things like virtual internships, connecting your students with employers who have, you know, subsidiaries or who have partners overseas and might be able to provide a virtual project or a virtual internship. And by project, I mean, this could even be something that might only be, you know, 20 hours of work that they need from a student, but it's going to give the student the opportunity to communicate with a business and with individuals who are overseas and begin to hone those cross-cultural skills in a way that, again, sitting in a classroom and working exclusively with individuals in your community, they might not otherwise develop. Similarly, thinking about ways that you can virtually bring speakers to campus. So this semester, one of the classes I've been teaching is a business and culture in Southeast Asia course. And this is a brand new course for Michigan State. We've piloted it for the first time this year. This is not anything that we were thinking about. You know, when we thought about global mindset and global experiences for our students, we thought about sending them overseas. And it wasn't until that was no longer an option that we thought about, how do we bring overseas to East Lansing? How do we bring these speakers? How do we do this for our students here? And so we've launched this global speaker series, and every week I have a different speaker from a different company or industry or country in Southeast Asia who is able to speak about everything from the geopolitical situation in Cambodia to what does it mean to be a foods manufacturer in Malaysia. And hint, the Malaysian government said, food manufacturers, you are an essential industry. You should remain open. However, the industry, the companies that manufacture the cardboard boxes that the food goes into, they were non-essential. They were not permitted to remain open. So at a certain point, you can make all the crackers and cookies and things like that that you want coming off the line. But if you don't have boxes to put them into, then the rubber really meets the road. And that was, you know, one of the things that my students have clung to a lot. You know, development of e-wallets and services like Grab and Uber around the world, comparing and contrasting those, but really hearing from individuals outside of their immediate surroundings who can talk about both the business context and sort of that life context has been incredibly valuable. And so these are courses that we will continue to offer even once our students are traveling abroad again. And there's certainly the type of classes that I would encourage you to think about. You know, they fit nicely with the Z degree model, right? You don't need a textbook. What do my students read? I find articles for them every week in the Washington Post, in the LA Times, in, you know, the South China Morning Post, in the BBC, and those types of articles. And I give them links and I say, you know, read this. And so, you know, this is a cost, this is a course that costs them nothing, but that really does give them exposure to so much of the world beyond, you know, our doors. So I think that's probably what I have for you. And I will defer to Erkan whether he wants to take questions on this piece now or whether he wants to talk about the corporate piece first and then do questions at the end. So Erkan?
There's one question actually in the chat box for you, if you would like to answer that.
So, have we ever attempted to place students in brief non-paid internships in foreign countries? So, yes. The challenge with that is if we as a university place students directly, there is significant liability there. There is liability around visa and immigration. There is liability around housing. There can even be liability around sort of Title IX, sexual harassment, those types of things. There's, I would love to tell you that it's all unicorns and rainbows. There's a lot that can go wrong, as I'm sure that you would imagine. And so when we place students in these non-paid internships, we tend to work with a provider. And I will tell you, I've done lots of research on providers. I've talked to virtually every provider who offers international internships that operates in this country. The provider that I like and that we use is Absolute Internship. The reason that I did not, discuss that as I was talking earlier, it's pricey. It's pricey because you're paying somebody else to really do that vetting, secure the housing, make sure that the housing is up to snuff, make sure that the employers, all of the background checks, all of that. And so the internships, not only is there the opportunity cost of what the student might have been doing otherwise, but there becomes a very real additional cost that the students are paying, which is part of the reason that I think virtual internships are a great alternative. Now, there are providers all over this country who are now offering virtual internships, and they say, we'll place a student. It's $1,500. Some of them I've seen as much as $2,000 or $3,000 to place a student in a virtual internship. Between us, I just think that's stupid. We at MSU have not gone the route of working with any of those providers. Alexis is laughing at me, and she can weigh in otherwise if she wants. It's incredibly expensive, and our students, Michigan State, we're a public school, we're a land grant school. About 3/4 of our students are from the state of Michigan. We're not a wealthy school. Our students don't have the money to spend on placement fees for virtual internships. So we are working to place students virtually, directly in options, and many of these are the short-term projects that I mentioned. But those we are placing directly, no fee. The students don't get paid, but they're not paying anything. That is also something that we piloted this year, and the feedback, both from employers as well as from students, has been so positive that is something that we're continuing to grow and will be an option beyond pandemic times. So, Judah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Here's what I suggest. Sarah, you have another question, and we only have 10 minutes till the end of our session, and there's another session after this. So I would love to have everybody have a break between the two sessions. I have two sessions in the afternoon, and I can easily spare 10-15 minutes on the company consultancy projects that I'm going to speak in those sessions. So if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to leave the remaining time to you to answer this other question, and maybe there might be follow-up questions, and cover my material in the afternoon.
Sure.
Good?
And I'll say too, just a second, George. I'll say too that I think, Erkan, did they all get my email address and my contact information?
We can make sure that they get it.
Okay.
Not yet, I think.
If there are questions, that you think of, even if it's something you think of over the weekend or something, feel free to send me an email and reach out. I want to make sure I get to the question from Taylor, but George, did you have something you wanted to say before that?
Well, Sarah, thanks so much for your presentation, and everything that you said is certainly on point. and based on my experiences at the Southwest Virginia Higher Education Center and the 9, I guess, short-term trips that we took overseas with, and they were combined trips with faculty and students, I might add. Those short-term trips were incredibly meaningful for those students, and for many of them, quite frankly, for about half the students, it's the first time they'd ever been on an airplane. For virtually all of them, and even including many faculty, it's the first time they had ever been out of the country. So all of that is, and talk about getting outside of one's comfort zone. But I think too, going back to the anecdote that you shared about your student and the subway adventures in Tokyo, I, over the years, have had feedback from students and also from faculty that went on these trips about how this gave individual students so much more self-confidence. And they said, gee, you know, I can get a passport. I can travel overseas. I can figure out how to navigate the subway system in Dortmund, which is where we spend a lot of time, or in Monterey. I can figure out how to do what I need to do. And then it becomes more a question of, they say, gee, I wonder what else I can do that nobody has either A, ever suggested to me, or B, even presented to me as a realistic option. And that's another kind of, I'll just briefly say that in particular, for those of us who have lived or work in rural areas, rural Virginia, and this would be true, I think, of other places, it's oftentimes there's almost like a de facto set menu, and say, okay, these are your young people, students, here's your de facto list of things you can do, and things you can do in Southwest Virginia. And anyway, it just, for many of these students, they just say, gee, no, there's a whole lot more I can do, and a whole lot more that I can learn and contribute. The one final point, and I'll just quickly say as a germane to community college students, in particular for those community college students who may not be in associate's degree programs, there's also, in my view, a tremendous value for those students as far as studying abroad as well, if they're going to be working in manufacturing or in a factory. And I'll tell you why. It's because in my experience working with several large companies in Southwest Virginia, they would say to me, you know, when we have our overseas customers or suppliers or JV partners visit our factory, they don't want to spend time up in the boardroom with the white collars. What do they want to do? They want to get down on the factory floor and see the production processes. They want to talk to the workers. And so having workers who have a basic understanding of the importance of international trade as it relates to their job, and also have an empathy level and a comfort level in terms of dealing with people from other cultures. It's just as important for those individuals as it is for those students who are more poised to pursue, let's say, a white-collar degree and white-collar career.
Yeah, no, I think those are great observations, George. And I would say in some ways, I would argue that it's even more important because, I think that the students who go into a community college with the idea that they're going to transfer to a four-year institution are likely to have, future opportunities. But it's your students who are in, more of the trade-based programs, or even some of the continuing, certification and things like that, that this may be sort of their one opportunity to do that. I want to make sure that I get to Taylor's question. She asked for advice or tips on how to make international connections, especially for, speakers or internships or things of that nature. And I think that there are a few ways that you can go about that. First of all, I would start with the immediate community and employers in the community. And what I mean about that is a few years ago, I did a workshop at a very, very small community college in very southern Arkansas, deep in the Delta. However, the largest industry there was timber. And the three largest companies operating there, one was Israeli, one was Chinese, and the third one, honestly, I don't remember. It might have been Canadian. But in this community, that you never would have expected from the outside to have such a global footprint, they actually, through the local employers, had some connections that way. So I would start by looking around to see what companies, what industries do you have, and how might they support this initiative. I also think you want to talk to your colleagues. Who do you know? Even for the class that I'm teaching now, some of my speakers, they were friends. I have a good friend who is Singaporean, and I contacted her and I said, who can you tell me in Singapore that would be willing to do this, that you think would be really good? And so a couple of the speakers for my class are not people that I knew or had any connection to, or that Michigan State University, as big as we are, had any connection to. They're people that were, connected through connections. So I think looking, sort of mining your own connections that way. And then another resource that I would put out there for you is the CIBER network, that all 15 of the CIBERs around the country are really invested in community college internationalization. And so reaching out to them and saying, gosh, we're doing this course on Latin America, and I've got some speakers, but it would really help me. Do you think you know of anybody who would be able to speak, for an hour on Brazil or Ecuador or something? Working with the CIBERs that way would also be an option. And then I think that, I would say that the internships are probably sort of the second piece of that, right? You've got to, relationship building. Relationships are important in the US. I mean, certainly you all know that you're all here today through relationships that you have one way or another, but they're that much more important outside of the US. And it's so much easier to get things done once you have the initial relationship. So, once you've connected with someone and they've, say, been a speaker for you, and you've talked with them and you have a sense of what this is and what this is about, I think then it becomes easier to begin to sort of get the hook for those larger pieces. Another resource that, again, I don't want to leave out is that CCID, Community Colleges for International Development, because one of the advantages there is they've got member schools not only from the United States, but all over the world. They've got member schools in Mexico, in Japan, in China, and Taiwan. And so if you can connect with colleagues who are located overseas, then they're also going to be able to help you with connecting with those speakers. They themselves may even be sources for that. For my class this year, a couple of the speakers have been academics who have been able to provide a more academic overview of, what are the major economic drivers of the Indonesian economy? How does it look like Indonesia is going to emerge from the COVID pandemic? And so I would also say, don't sort of write off that piece of it as well. So those would be my recommendations where to start. Does that answer the question, Taylor?
Yes, thank you. You were spot on when you were talking about the price. And, our classes are very small. We have like 8 to 10 students per class. So, out of those 8 to 10, most of them have families, full-time jobs. They're taking evening classes, they're taking online classes. So leveraging other community colleges was a great point. So I was just interested in what other resources were out there where they didn't have to pay $2,000, because not only can they not afford it, but we as a college can't either. So just having those other resources and advice was helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think we are at 8:30 or at 11:30. I know that Erkan wanted to make sure that you guys have time for a break. What I can do is, I will stay around here for a few minutes if there are any final follow-up questions, but otherwise I think you've got a break until 11:40. Is that right, Erkan?
Yep, that's correct.
Until 11:40. And then you all should, head back. And I think you've got your business panel then. Is that right? Excellent.
Thank you, Sarah. This was really helpful and very valuable. I really appreciate.
I'm thrilled I could be here with you. I mean, community colleges, like I said, I did these programs for many years. My dissertation was actually on study abroad in community college. So, coming to you guys today is a little bit like coming home. So thank you.